Yeah, I appreciate everybody for being here. This is pretty dope. So, um, the first point for Jonathan is Jonathan grows up with a weird last name, which he gets made fun of for most of his childhood and adolescent life. 25 years later, he meets his long lost aunt, who tells him that his last name is not really his last name.
Yeah, that. that. Okay, yeah, so I'm gonna just start, we're starting off just spilling the tea right now a little bit about my family. But yeah, so basically, from my dad's side of the family, we didn't really grow up that close. And, he was kind of a private person. So like, I never really got to know his side of the family as much. And my last name, it's not anyway, is I think Shannon said it's Guisbert. I forget which pronunciation you had, Guisbert. It's Guisbert. It's spelled Guisbert. So it's not like it's a kind of a hard name to pronounce. And even for me, like growing up, I was like, how am I supposed to pronounce it? My dad would say Goosebert, and I never liked that. So I was like, I need to find like another pronunciation that kind of sounds cool or like just sounds better. I don't know. So I went through phases of just like, different modifications. It was like Guisbert or Guisbert, just straight up like Guisbert, like the most American way I could say it. But it always felt like kind of wrong. It always felt like, I didn't really know where it came from or, really like what's the backstory behind it. And, as a kid, I just asked my parents like, oh, like where's this from? And, the answer that I got was pretty vague. It was just like, oh yeah, there was like, European colonists in Bolivia, and so your name got changed, or that was the name given, so it was like a European name. I was like, okay, yeah, as a kid, you just kind of accept it. It was just like, okay, sure, it makes sense. And then, as I got older, one day, like my aunt found my dad on, or she found me and my sister actually on Facebook, and she just messaged us like, hey, like, are y'all Rudy's? My dad's name was Rudy. Y'all Rudy's kids? It's like, yeah, like, who's this? At that time, Facebook was also like, probably still is, just filled with like a lot of like, spam stuff, like weirdos or whatever. So I was like, all right, this is really weird. But eventually we come to I meet my aunt for the first time. And I start asking her about my family history, or like, where's, I was like, do you have this Guisbert name? Like, what is this about? And yeah, she basically tells me that when my dad immigrated to New York, he immigrated with his name starting with a Q, Guisbert. I was like, oh, okay, that's different. But it made sense because a lot of my Ecuadorian side of the family have last names that start with the prefix like QUI. And it's a very like common indigenous prefix in like the Andean countries in Ecuador and Bolivia, which I also didn't know at the time. And so when I found that out, I was like, okay, that the beginning makes sense, but the Bert part, I'm like, that still sounds kind of weird. So she was like, yeah, we grew up with like Guisbert, like that's our, from what she knows, that's her family's last name. And then, this was like, I don't know, just fairly recently, like a few years ago that I found this out. And basically like I started to research it a little more, and I found out that even that Bert part was not really, that was also added to make it sound more European. And so I found out that my actual last name is Guisbert with P-E at the end, and it's like really short. And I'd always wanted like a short name. I don't know why, so I was like, Guisbert was always like, it was a long name, plus my first name is Jonathan, so it was always just a long thing to write. But through that process, I kind of like figured out that it's those things that feel kind of wrong that like have always led me to a next step, or like kind of prompted me to like make a certain type of move. So with this, it made me like really look into my family's history, really look into my ancestors and our like indigenous roots. And it's kind of also prompted me to like think about what's the next thing that I'd like to explore. And through like an art and design perspective, that's something that I've always known I wanted to explore that further, but now like having an actual name is like, it's like really powerful, like knowing, I feel like it made me feel like I know where I come from. So, sorry. So yeah, that was really like kind of a groundbreaking moment. And I think when I found out too, I like literally like, I there was like a weird like laugh and cry at the same time. Like I never felt like that before, but it was just like that thing that felt wrong like for so long. And then it's like taking me now to like where I am today. It's taking me to like the next step and kind of trying to combine like my culture with like art and design through like my own perspective. So that's sort of just like a passion project now that I've been like putting a lot of time into and effort, and yeah, that's been like really exciting. So that's the backstory to that. Like,
so do you think that because it seems like you gained more confidence in yourself maybe since you did a lot of this research on your last name? So I guess my question was, did you have more of a sense of identity when you know, did all this research about your family, and do you think that added to the reason why you had the confidence, you know, after versus before?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, because I don't know, it was just something that I just accepted for so long as like, oh, okay, this is just like a thing that I feel a little bit like embarrassed about, especially as a kid. You know, it's like there's like anything that's like off norm is like you can just get easily made fun of like so fast. So like, you know, that definitely changed, and like you know, I immediately was like, oh man, I gotta change my last name. I gotta like legally do all this stuff. I was like, oh, which I'm still kind of like planning to do. But yeah, it does like having more of like a truth, I guess, that I can like actually like trace myself to or like connect myself to, you know. And I've always been close to my family, so like, you know, it was like kind of strange to know my family to like a certain point in time, you know. And like, you know, before, let's say like my grandma generation, like, you know, we really didn't have much knowledge of like you know, our ancestors. And I think like just having a name that like I feel proud of, and because I know now where it comes from, you know. And the Quechua people in Bolivia and Ecuador, that's, you know, even the name of for the people of Quechua is like QU. So I'm like, oh yeah, it makes me feel like I belong now, you know.
That's what's up.
Yeah, so it definitely added to my confidence, and yeah, now I'm just like, all right, I gotta change my name.
Yeah, that's dope. I think a lot of the times we overlook the amount of confidence and that we can have in the name, in our name, you know. So that's powerful. That's powerful. So in college, Jonathan picked his first major, mechanical engineering, based on his 8th grade career survey. He picked his second major, accounting and business law, because he thought he looked fly in a suit.
Yeah, that was, in retrospect, you know, everything is like easy to kind of critique, but like I literally picked it because we did a visualization exercise of in your future, for your dream job, like what do you look like in this job? What are you wearing? Oh shoot, got the vibe lights on. Right? Yeah, I just continue. Oh, there you go. Are you just gonna have to keep walking around now to keep the sense? What was I saying? Oh, okay. Oh yeah, about the suits thing. So yeah, we had this visualization exercise, and it was asking like, what if you can visualize yourself in the future? Like, what are you wearing? What do you look like? What's your hairstyle? What shoes are you wearing? What kind of car are you driving? You know, just all of the like visual things to like give you an idea or like kind of spark something to kind of get you thinking. And I think this was like maybe my second year in college. And I think the first thing for whatever reason, I was just like, oh man, like I just, when I visualized it, I was just like, oh, I think maybe because I was very out of like corporate and like suit and tie life, and there was, you know, there was nobody in my family that like wore suit and tie like to go to work, you know. So I think then I just like was thinking like, oh man, that'd be fly if I like had like an ill suit, like a black suit, super clean, like hair gel, and I was like had all these like really specific things. Even the car, I was like, okay, yeah, I want this specific car. I was like, all right, cool. So like, and I think that I was like, all right, so a suit. I'm like, all right, it must be something like businessy. And then I happened to work, like my work study job was in like a STEM like office, and one of the instructors or like mentors was part of like the business school also. So yeah, I was like, all right, well let's like try accounting, and then I had like a partial scholarship to the school that covered like most of my like tuition. So I was like, I'm gonna squeeze as much out of this as possible. I like double majors, and like, so that's the like business and accounting thing. I was like, I'm gonna get as much out of this like free money as possible. And then yeah, I spent like those like the rest of the 2.5 years or so, and that led me to like my first job out of college. I was a CPA for like a year and a half. And it was kind of just started because of like that visualization, which is like, you know, now I'm a very different like spot, you know, of course, like doing footwear design for like the past like almost 7 years now. But, you know, just taking that like really left turn, I learned a lot that I can't say it like applies directly. Like I'm not out here like designing with Excel sheets or something like that, but you know, it's like some of the thinking, like I think still is applied. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So while working as a financial analyst at Adidas, Jonathan's desk was located in the back of an old showroom in New York City. One night, he was feeling a little snoopy and stumbled upon a box with Derrick Rose's first signature shoe. About 7 years later, he gets the opportunity to design one of Derrick Rose's new signature shoes.
Yeah. So that's, I think, like the bulk of, I think, like the shift in my career, I think just started off like that little moment. Cause I was very much into basketball. And D Rose, you know, this was like 2011 D Rose, like, you know, MVP, like all that. So when I found those shoes, and I had never like grown up creative or I guess I shouldn't say creative, but using my creativity in like an artistic way, or like, you know, I didn't grow up drawing stuff or painting or anything like that. But I found those shoes and I was like, oh man, these shoes are hard. Like it just really made me think, well, one, I just like loved the visuals of it. And it just made me think like, or be curious of like, I was remembering like my, you know, as a kid, I used to like read different books. I had like asthma when I was a kid, asthma. So I couldn't really run or like play sports until I grew out of it, like at like 10 or something. So I was always like kind of had this like inventor sort of like thought or dream. And yeah, so then when I found those shoes, I was like, oh, I wonder, like, I kind of remember wanting to like invent things. And like, I think I drew like when I was little, I remember like sharing with my sister, like a little sketch of like this like tablet thing. Like, oh, you just read this on a computer or something like that, right? So I remember like having these ideas of like, oh yeah, like just technology and like just thinking about the future, right? I was always like really curious. So when I found the shoes, I decided to like just tiptoe into like this world of design, because I never heard about like, I didn't know like industrial design or product design was like a thing. I just like, I was still working full time, and then that's when I took like my first sort of like design class, or it was like I took an apparel making class and then a footwear making class. So I learned kind of how to make both, because I didn't really know like what I wanted to do either. It was just like, oh, I always kind of liked shoes just because of like sports, you know, like playing soccer and basketball, it's like very footwear, like, you know, focused. So that got me to take my first class at Fashion Institute in New York. And yeah, once I learned how to make clothes, how to make shoes, you know, I kind of, the footwear thing just kind of felt right. Like the apparel thing was cool, but it was also like, I don't know, I didn't even finish my final project because it was just like, it was like making like a button-up shirt for the first time. And like I said, I had never like sewed much before or like done anything creative. So yeah, I didn't even like really finish that project. It was all like pinned up still, like at the end in the final. I was like definitely getting a bad grade. But the footwear one, like I just like zoomed through it. Like I made this, we were making like pumps. So I made that super fast, and I had all these ideas. Like for whatever reason, it was like super exciting, and like I just had all these different ideas for like what can go on the shoes, and the making process was also like really fun. So then that was like, I guess I just felt like, okay, one was like not really right at the time, and I stuck with the footwear one. And let's say like a year later or so, I was still working at Adidas, but then I was like, all right, if I want to really do this footwear thing, I was just thinking like Portland would be like the place to go, because you know, a lot of sportswear companies are there. But since I was still at Adidas, you know, obviously I was like, oh, there could be like a transfer or whatever. So yeah, I made the transfer, and then I studied industrial design at Art Institute of Portland. And after like I think 2.5 years or so, I was just doing that part time again, and I was like, hella debating like, oh, should I quit my job and like go to school full time? Like, do I need this like degree, you know, to make this kind of change, or could I just like pick it up as I go, kind of thing. And then, you know, I was just getting advice from everybody because I'm like, yo, I just need somebody to tell me like what's right. And then I remember this one design director at the time. I was like getting advice from him, and he was like, yeah, I think you should quit, and like you need a degree, like you kind of need it. But then I looked at the numbers, and like tuition was crazy, and I was like, I'm not gonna take out some crazy loans or whatever. I think it was like $50K like a year or something like that. Yeah, it was dumb. So then I was like, you know what, I'm gonna just like keep going. Like I went to Pensole, so I'm a Pensole alum. 2015, did like the World Sneaker Championship. So I did that, kept going to design school, and then eventually kind of like, I guess like stumbled my way into an internship. Oh, that's right. I applied for a job, my first like assistant design job, and I didn't get it. And I was told like, oh, you know, we really liked your work, but like you have no experience. Like we need somebody that can like, you know the process and whatever. So I was like, all right, that's fine. Like, cool, just accepted it. You know, it was like my whatever, like 10th, like no or something like that. I couldn't get a start without experience. Maybe I'll like round two. There you go, one round. A little ice on. Okay. Yeah, so like, you know, it's one of those things like, okay, yeah, you can't get your first job until you have experience, but like you can't get the experience. So like, how do I get in? Like, you know? But yeah, so I didn't get that first job, but the person who interviewed me like maybe a few months later, and then yeah, like a few months later, he comes up to my desk and was just like, hey, I know that didn't work out before, but like, you want to take an internship? And I was like, all right, like yeah, sure. So then I quit my job. I was I think I had just gotten to like a senior financial analyst or whatever, and I was like, all right, let's just try it. So I quit that completely, and I tried to be like, hey, can I do like a half step, like keep me on for like half of this role so I don't lose my job? And it was like, no, like we need a full-time person, so like you either gotta go or like stay, kind of thing. So I left. I was like, all right, cool. And I just like moved right downstairs to the design team. So it was like an easy, you know, move, but like, yeah, just like changed, like, you know, kind of felt like it was like basically like starting over, you know, in a different way. So anyway, I think that was a lot of context for that thing. But that I think is like the bulk of like, you know, my transition happened from that to then like, you know, I was on the originals team, basketball team. So then I got to like eventually, weirdly, like, you know how these things work. It's just like always some like, you know, universal like power that is like carrying me, you know, into like then being able to work on like the same athlete that like kind of sparked my interest, like being able to work on a shoe for him was like, yeah, it was pretty dope at the time.
So I want to kind of get into that a little bit. Obviously, Derrick Rose was a huge athlete, and when you found yourself working on his shoe, I want to talk about like your thought process behind that. You know, a lot of times when we go from one level to another, at first we don't really feel qualified to do the work that we are being asked to do. So kind of what was your thought process and going from being a fan of his to working on something that he would wear on his feet?
Yeah, that was a good question. I feel like all these moves have never, I don't know if it's just like because I'm moving so fast, I don't really feel the weight of the moment, you know? It's just like, and maybe it's also like the New York like thing where it's just like you're always hustling, you have multiple jobs. Like in school I had 3 jobs, like there was no, you know, it was always something, and I always had like multiple things to juggle. So I don't know if it's that just like doesn't give me time to feel that like uncertainty, I guess, you know, which I think for me like has been something that I feel like I've constantly been doing. Like even once I got my design job, like I did that for a bit, but then like on the side, I would always like have something else like in mind or other ideas. And, you know, I've always was also interested in like education and how to like share the stuff that I learned to like other people who could benefit from it, who also don't go through this like linear path of being able to go to design school and then kind of getting in. So, you know, I think that kind of helped me just to like stay in the moment, I guess, you know, like looking back at it, because I'm like, I probably would have like freaked out if I like really thought about it, you know. But even writing this, like, I didn't really even think about it until I wrote this, really, like till now. And that was like, you know, I don't know, a few years ago already. So I think that's kind of been like my non-intentional like trick, I guess, that, you know, even for like the Olympic stuff, like that you and the team got to wear, like, you know, and I would see it on the screen or whatever, we're doing our design presentations. It's like, oh, Paris Olympics, blah, blah. But it just, you know, it just felt like, all right, this is just the next project, like the next thing, you know. But then, you know, after like seeing y'all run and everything, I was like, oh shoot, like that was, yeah, that's a moment. Yeah.
That's sweet. That's dope.
Yeah.
That's dope.
Hey Derek, are we okay on time, by the way? I'm good. Okay, cool.
Okay. The fourth one is
The last one.
during the height of the pandemic, Jonathan is working at Pensole as a design instructor for a program called Diversity by Design. He gets an email from his friend that Brooks Running is creating their first ever elite athlete product team. 3 years later, he watched and screamed as he saw the spikes he designed crossing the finish line at the Paris Olympics.
Yeah, literally. And like when I was watching, I was like just lit the whole time. Right? Like the whole, and we like had it at, you know, on the screen at work like this, and yeah, it was just like moment after moment, like, yeah, also very, very surreal and very just like, I think maybe that was probably the first time where I'm like, oh shoot, like this is a thing, you know, that I'll like remember, you know. But yeah, that when I was at Pensole, so I was teaching at Pensole, I was teaching design for like a year and change, I think. And at that moment or at that time, I was also a little like, kind of just taking a break from like the corporate world, you know. And I don't know, for whatever reason, I'm sure like people have different like timing patterns in their lives. So like for me, it's always been like 2 to 3 years. It's like, when I look back, I'm like, oh, okay, that's kind of been like my pattern. I'll get that later. Yeah, kind of been my pattern. Like there's always a shift every 2-3 years. So at that time, yeah, I was like taking a break, and I was like, you know, just kind of thinking like, what's next, and you know, enjoying teaching because that's also something I've wanted to do, and yeah, then I think hearing like about this new team, so like it was something brand new, it didn't exist yet, and even though I was like, all right, I'm gonna take a break for like a while, I was thinking like a few years or something. I was like, all right, maybe this seems like, you know, kind of a cool thing to be able to be a part of something like brand new and something that you can really like influence and like be able to kind of make your own in a way, you know. And then working with athletes too, like that was something I already kind of did a little bit, you know. But I think this was a brand that like also felt like it was a lot, you know, it's smaller and like more intimate, I would say. Like, you know, we work with your team like a lot, like during the process. So yeah, so I was like, you know what, okay, maybe this like happened for a reason, like the timing of it. And then yeah, like working with y'all has been really cool. I think you joined like a little after most of that process was done, but yeah, just getting to work with the athletes, like it really just helped me to not see this like public image of people, you know, because I feel like you're just like seeing these images all the time. And you know, kind of like skews your view, or you like get nervous about like meeting people and stuff like that. But yeah, that was like a really good experience because everybody was really chill. Like, you know what I mean? Like there was I didn't feel like there was much like egos and stuff like that, even though there's like some of the best athletes in the world, you know? So yeah, so that was kind of like the thing that got me to work on the shoes that even the team got to run in. So yeah, I think that's the last one of my little stories. So yeah, now I'll switch it over to Brandon. I'm gonna just kind of do the same thing. Give you a couple prompts in the quiz. Okay, so based on my like million pivots and stuff, I know that changing directions and doing things that you feel like is maybe the wrong way yeah, that it often can lead us, it usually does, I feel like, lead to better things, like really amazing things, and like things that just like, kind of surprise you. So yeah, can you just like speak to, I guess, how that has, how you've experienced that, I guess, like, becoming a professional athlete and becoming an Olympian, and like maybe some of those like pivots or like wrong steps?
Yeah, I mean, man, like it's funny because when we start off on a career, we are about to go to school. We have this picture perfect plan of what we have for our life, and it never goes like that. In the Bible it says we establish where we want to go, but it's the Lord that establishes our steps. And I feel like my life has been a testimony of that. So my journey begins when I was 3 years old. That's when I stepped onto the track for the first time. My dad had a plan of having athletes as kids. Like, he literally went to the track meet to find his wife. And so,
It's not a bad idea.
yeah. So he went to the track meet to find his wife, and he found my mother. And they met at Mizzou, and a couple years later, my older brother, who plays football, popped out, and then 17 months later, I popped out as well. So from the start, it's my parents had a plan of purposeful excellence. They instilled that in us as kids. They put us out on the track when we were 3 because we was always tearing up the house. And they always spoke life into us growing up. Like, if this is something that you want to do, if this is something that you believe that you can achieve, you can. And here are the steps in order to get there. So for me, growing up, I played basketball, I ran track, and I played football. And I was very blessed to find early success in track. I was deemed a child prodigy, so to speak. And at 13 and 14, I was blessed to achieve world records. But that came with a lot of pressure, because a lot of the time you see a kid that's really, really good at the sport at a young age, they grow up and they burn out. So that was kind of a stigma around my career early, and I'm a Gen Z baby, I guess. So I was born in 2002. So social media was live and prevalent when I was a teenager. So as a teenager, I was seeing everything, all the comments about people saying, oh, he's going to grow up, he's going to burn out, he's going to do this, he's going to do that. It really, that can hurt a kid, you know what I'm saying? So the support system that surrounded me did a very, very good job of speaking life into me. So I grow up, I graduate high school in 2020. And that in itself was a moment where I kind of had an identity crisis because COVID, and to the point where I didn't even know if I was going to be able to run in college, so the Lord was good and COVID passed. Well, it's still there out there, but we was able to run. In my freshman year, I was blessed to experience success. Got second at the NCAA championships, and then went on the next year, won a national championship indoors in the 800 and the 4x4, and made my first world championship team my sophomore year of college. After that, I went professional, moved out to LA for a year, and then moved up to Seattle the year after that. So I was talking to Derek about this in high school. When you graduate high school, you always get the book, All the Places You'll Go. That's a staple. And man, that has been a testimony for the past 4 years of my whole life. If you would have told me my senior year of high school that I would go down to Texas A&M, go professional 2 years after that, go to LA, and then move to Seattle a year after that, I wouldn't have believed you. But all those moves in of themselves were necessary for me to be at the place that I am today. So it has been a great journey for me. I'm so blessed. I'm so happy. And I wouldn't change it for the world. Even though in the moments it hurt, But looking back on it, those moves were necessary for my progression.
Dang, that's amazing, too. Like, I guess just thinking also about all the things that even before you got to run, like you said, like your dad kind of already having this plan in mind,
Yeah.
which like, I mean, it's worked out, right? Like,
Yeah.
Like, can you maybe talk about, were there other ways that you sort of learned this sort of, intentionality or like, having a clear vision?
Right.
Did you get that from your dad's side? Like, you've seen that, knowing this story, I guess, and like,
Yeah.
how does that come up? Like, because I feel like for me, it's been kind of very different where like, I kind of have like a bunch of ideas of like, oh, what it could be, but I don't know until like, I kind of just take the next step that feels right. And then it's like everything kind of beyond that next step is like a little gray, and I'm like, all right, this feels right. And then I do the next thing that feels right at the moment. So yeah, I'm just like, curious, like, what would that influence like?
Yeah, it was huge. Both of my parents did like I said before, did a very good job of speaking life into me at the end of the day. And they did a very good job of stressing the importance of having small goals leading up into having a bigger goal. I mean, you think about it as if you hold a lamp up in a cloud of fog, you can't see 50 feet away, but you could see the step ahead of you. So for me, it was all about that. It was all about, okay, what is something that I want to achieve tomorrow? What is something that I want to achieve next week? What is something I want to achieve next month, next year? And those little victories added up into the culmination of running in the Olympics. In 2012, I was watching the Olympics with my mother. And I told her, I said, Mom, I want to be there one day. And for her, it was never not as too big for you, Brandon. It was, okay, let's go get it, And after that, it was an intentional process of, okay, how do we get there? But through that, one thing I would really praise my parents for doing is they made sure I stayed a kid. I didn't really skip any steps in life to where I'm trying to go back to these steps when I'm 22 years old. You know what I'm saying? So, but for them, it was all when me and my brother and my sister say that we want to do something and we show that we're serious about doing it. It's about being very intentional, but being very intentional in the way that not just saying a goal and just throwing it out there and not having a plan in order to achieve that goal. They did a very good job of making sure that we established a process in order to get there.
That's great. The other thing I was thinking about too, while you were kind of talking about your journey as a child prodigy and like, seeing, I guess facing the pressure, but also like, maybe the criticism or like,
Right.
like you were saying, just, you're seeing how others can speak like publicly, right? Like,
Right.
It wasn't like that before. So, I know you said you had a good like support system and,
Yeah.
it sounds like your parents were like supporting you through everything. When it comes to things like that, where I feel like, as a kid, I don't know if something happened at school or like somebody like made fun of me or something, like I usually wouldn't tell my parents. If anything, it was like, oh, I'll tell my friends or like, just kind of like try to laugh it off or whatever. Like what was that like for you in terms of like the positive like support system that you had? Was it your parents? Was it like your brother, your friends?
Right. It was everybody, and I think they would speak life into me, but at some point you have to come and believe it for yourself. Somebody can only want something for you so much. You have to want it in yourself for it to be the end all be all. So one thing I had to learn how to do is stop worrying about what other people were saying about me, what they thought about me, and start worrying about what God thought about me at the end of the day. And when I started doing that, my life changed. I started, doing things for His glory rather than the glory of man. And I think in my journey, that has really brought me far, and I think that that has been really critical to the success that I've been able to achieve so far. So I would say it was a culmination of both my parents and my friends and my support system continuously like speaking life over me, but also me coming to the realization myself that I have to believe in myself, and I have to, you know, really grasp it myself for it to really make a difference, you know?
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's great, man. Because like, I'm still presently like, I'll post something on social media like once every 3 months and like, ooh, like what are people gonna say? You know, like that's wild. That's great, man. Yeah, I guess like talking about one of the other shifts that happened. You know, you changed I think you mentioned it a little bit earlier, but changing your training situation, like going into an Olympic year.
Right.
Yeah, like that was a huge risk. Was a huge risk.
Yeah.
Of course, yeah, it paid off, right?
Yeah.
Can you just talk about that decision and like how you knew, and maybe also like when you knew it was the right one? Yeah.
It's funny because for the longest I didn't know. I didn't know, and it's always a huge risk, you know. You obviously you have a certain process that you follow, you know, and changing that up in a year where it's so important. We think about the Olympics; it comes once every 4 years, you know. So every time it comes around, you know, you have to be at your best. So kind of changing your whole situation before that even happens is something that's not really heard of. But sometimes change is necessary. You know, sometimes our unwillingness to change is what's keeping us from where God wants us to be in life. You know, so man, I just tell you, like, I remember contemplating going to Brooks or staying in LA. And I was coming off a season where I wasn't really running how I felt like I could run. And I remember I was praying about it, and I was sitting in church. And the pastor was saying a message. And for those of you who don't know, Brooks is located in Seattle, so I would have had to move from Texas, then I moved to LA. That was a big move. And then I would have had to move from LA to Seattle, which was another big move. But the pastor was preaching, and all of a sudden he goes, he was like, something, or you could be in Seattle. And I was like, me and my mom looked at each other like wide-eyed. He was like, I don't know why I said Seattle, but I said Seattle. I've never been to Seattle. And I kind of took that as like, okay, maybe this was the Lord guiding me to a certain place, to Seattle. And
maybe.
Yeah. You know, I think that's funny because a lot of time we ask God for signs, and He'll give us a sign. We'll be like, well, maybe, Lord, could you give me a little bit more confirmation about that? You know what I'm saying? Right. But I think that was a call for me to change my situation. You know, so and at that point, when I changed my situation, I knew I had to lock in. I knew I had to give my full trust to my coach, give my full trust to my the company that surrounded me. And when I did that, man, it worked wonders. My coach sat me down. He was like, man, I think if you come to us, I believe that you can have a big drop in time. And for the first part of my outdoor season, it wasn't looking that way. It wasn't looking that way at all. But man, it just started clicking, and it culminated into a point where we made the team and realized a dream I've had since I was 12 years old, 10 years old. So it was a blessing. I was very excited. So
man, that's the Seattle thing at church.
It was crazy, man. I tell you, dog. I was
He said, "Give me a sign." The Lord booked you a flight.
Right, time to book the flights.
Dang, that's wild. When you just mentioned a little bit about the process, I guess, of you joining the team,
right?
And I guess believing that this was going to be a positive improvement in your time.
Mm-hmm.
Was there anything specific about Seattle or about the people or person maybe that you talked to that like you were able to have that belief? Because it is a big risk, right?
Yeah, it is.
So I'm wondering like what made you, or who kind of made you feel of the people that you met in this new state, new new team. Like, yeah, what was that like?
Man, just the community of Brooks. I mean, this year I really was able to lock in and realize that it truly does take a village to achieve the dreams that you want to achieve. Not only was my coach an integral part, but my trainer, my nutritionist, my teammates, and it's just the people that Brooks surrounded me with. I mean, we see what we do out on the track, but going back to you're the one that's making the shoes that we're able to perform in. You know, and one thing about track now is the spikes are so crazy. It's like you're running on trampolines. So for you guys to make a product to match what the other companies are doing is essential to our success. You know, so I want to take time to recognize and say thank you and thank all the Brooks employees and things like that. So it truly takes a village for you to get where you're called to be, and I would say that was the biggest part of my success, just the village and the people that I was surrounded by that made it happen for me. So it was great.
That's awesome. That wasn't even in the notes, man. Okay, last thing. It sounds like we maybe have a minute or so, or is that time, Derek? Or?
No, you guys have save some minutes for Q&A, I guess.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah. So, are you okay if we?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So with the last 6 minutes, then we'll just like open it up to Q&A. If anybody has any questions, or comments or whatever, please like feel free. I don't know if we just pass the mics around if there's a question. Okay.
There's only two.
Sorry.
There's only two. So
Okay. Cool. Yeah. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts or comments or anything? If you raise your hand, I'll just like come by with the mic.
I can talk.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
This is a question for Brandon, I guess. How do you feel like the pivot to being a professional athlete, what are the things you've had to you can't be outside. Like you have to have your day looks completely different than maybe somebody that's 22 and living a different life. So what are some of the things I guess you've had to cut back on, or what does your day-to-day look like in order for you to be where you are now?
Yeah, that's a great question because that definitely changed a lot when I came to Seattle. I think we talk about intentionality and where we want to go, but we also have to be very intentional on how we're going to get there. You know, when I talked about the process is not only setting little goals, but setting even smaller goals within those to reach those little goals. So for me, I had to change the things that I put in my body. I had to be asleep at a certain time. It was a sacrifice that I had to make in the short term to be able to enjoy the fruits of my labor in the long term. And it was hard at the time. You know, no discipline at the time is fun. But when I was able to cross that line and call myself an Olympian, it was just a culmination of hard work that I felt really, 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 really good about. So it was things that, you know, if you're called to do extraordinary things, you can't be normal. You know, at the end of the day, you know, in order to be number one, you have to, you know, you hear the saying, in order to be number one, you have to be odd. You know, one is an odd number. So you're not able to do what everybody else is doing, and that's the thing that separates you and where you're trying to go. So that's something that I really internalized this year and really put into my life. So.
One follow-up, and then I'll leave it. Sorry, no, you don't even have to lie. So in those moments when you have the doubt, though, because 4 years is a long time.
100%.
So when you get in those seasons, you're like, well, am I doing the right thing? Am I not? Like, how do you either quiet that voice or like redirect yourself to be like, no, I'm sure faith is a big part of that.
Yeah. I think that we all have those moments. I mean, the season is around like 9 months long, so there's plenty of time to doubt. You know, after you have a bad race, you're like, man, is all of this worth it? You know what I'm saying? I'm doing all of this and I'm not getting the results that I want. But I think it all comes back to trusting in the process, you know, trusting the people that God has put around you to get you to the place where you feel like you need to be. So for me, it was about confiding in my parents, confiding in my coach, and just trusting that the abilities that God put in me are able to shine at the right moment. So I think that would, yeah, no problem.
Any questions? This would be a question for you both, but I'd be interested in what some small goals for each of you are next, and like what the big goals for each of you are next.
Yeah. So I'm an 800 runner, but I have 2 5Ks coming up in November and December. I have a turkey trot on Thanksgiving that I want to PR in, and I have a cross country race in December that I want to do really well in. So for me, it's about making sure I'm doing everything that I need to do now. Staying healthy is the biggest thing, doing everything I can do to stay on the track. Our best ability is availability. So making sure that I'm not overlooking any part of the process that needs to be had, so that when I get to these races, I'm able to perform at the best of my ability. So.
Did you say like what are some of the small steps like next, right? You're just talking about one.
I may be a big one. I'm nosy.
No, all good. I think small steps. Dang, I'm trying to think like what ones that I can say are not currently. There's strategic things happening. But okay, I think small ones are. Let's say for like this passion project, I've been kind of what I was sharing earlier, and I was kind of been working towards discovering my like design hand, I guess, that is combined with my ancestors and like my cultural heritage. So I think in that there's some like clear small steps of just I guess things I've also learned through like the design, like being in a design process. So I think small steps are just kind of I guess like organizing myself. I think like it sounds like you've like what Brandon was sharing before was there's like a really nice like structured way to do it. So for me it hasn't really been like that. So I think that's a learning that I'm trying to implement now, where I'm trying to literally put like Post-its and like in a place where I see them all the time. So I'm like, okay, this is the next thing and the next thing. It just like feels nice to like rip one off and like throw it out. So I think that's sort of the things I've been planning is just like, I guess, actually like doing planning now versus just before where I think I was like organically like, oh, let me try this. This feels great. Let me try that, So I think that's been like, I would say the small things that I'm working on. And it's like small steps. And I think bigger steps, I think bigger steps for me would probably be, I guess just around like the long-term vision of where I want to be, that also that's been something that, discovering my last name has helped me to identify. So I think that now planning for like that like end vision, which even when I was wanting to get into footwear design and like design sneakers and like, I don't know, I had this idea of what I thought it was going to be. And then, I feel like there's like that's the goal, and that was it. Like I thought that was, there's nothing after that. I'll just reach that goal in one day and that's kind of it. Like, I made it kind of thing. But then you get there and it's like, okay, it's great. It's everything plus, that I thought it was going to be. And then I didn't realize that there'd be like another dream after that, or other goals. Like once you reach that top, you're like, oh, okay, now there's another peak, and like, I guess, trying to feel out like when is it the one that like I want to stay at kind of thing. So I feel like there's all these goals like within my career and also like my passion projects that are kind of like making me think a little bit more like long term. Like it sounds like what you've been doing all along. So yeah.
I got the mic. So I have a question for each one of you, and maybe the first question let's give it to Brandon so that you get some break. So Brandon, you mentioned that your father or your family played really a very big role in where you are. So kudos to that, and of course you are a Gen Z person. So can you please speak something about, besides parents putting a plan for where you should be, and you of course self-motivated person, what were the other factors which you could look back and just say, hey, these were something voluntary, something which probably parents seeded in there, and something which kind of just fell right in place for your success?
Yeah, so you're okay. Yeah. So that's a great question. I think that some of the things that my parents did a really good job of, like I said, is really pushing me to be the best that I could be. I would say, like I said, my faith is huge in my success. But man, just I don't know. I think that sometimes that like we said before, just like you wanting it, you know what I'm saying, is that's the most important part. You wanting it, for yourself. My parents didn't want my dream more than I wanted it for myself. They just provided me with everything that I needed to have to be successful. They would pay for everything when I was a kid. I never really had to have a job. It was like, B, we paying for this right now, so we ain't got to pay for college. So if you don't get a scholarship, dog, you know what I'm saying? So, but I would just say another big part was the environment that I was in. I was able to meet a lot of people, like-minded individuals, I think I was able to do a really good job of surrounding myself with people who also wanted to be great, whether it wasn't in track, it was in finance or business or anything like that. So me and my brother always feed off of each other, and that's one person who I can say that we're integral to each other's success because we're always pushing each other, so my parents, my environment, my faith, and through that, I was able to land opportunities. I was able to be in places that I didn't really even deserve to be in. Doors were opening for me that no man can shut. So I would just say those were the three foundations for me, and it was just God's plan for my life. So
Thank you.
thank you.
John, one question from you. You mentioned that you started with mechanical engineering, pivoted to accounting, CPA, then footwear, right? So during all this, of course, you're very agile. Probably everything fell in place, or of course you whatever path you got from. Did you have any mentor or coach who probably contributed to all this, changing direction, or what led to all this? Yeah.
I think through a lot of those changes, I think maybe that is part of, part of the, experience my family had. Till that point, it wasn't I think nobody was really in a place where I felt okay, they can literally guide me. So I feel while I had strong family connections, in terms of these career moves, I think it was a little challenging because I didn't have a mentor that I can tell me what's the right move. And maybe that's also why I did all these different things, because maybe if somebody who knew better was no, just go a little straighter down this path instead of making all these turns, So I think maybe that kind of worked a little bit in my favor somehow, because I didn't unfortunately feel from a career standpoint until I got to Pensole, really, where Dwayne I think has been such an amazing mentor. But all through those early things, in school, I feel you have your the school mentors and stuff that you try career kind of guidance people and stuff like that. But it was such a random path. Nobody was yeah, that makes sense. Do that. If anything, I'll just ask people, and they're no, don't do that. Just finish things in a more direct way. So yeah, I think it would have been nice in some of those earlier phases to have somebody that I could kind of count on. So I really just had to feel for myself what felt right in that moment, and I think that helped me to not freak out when I was doing all these different things. Yeah. Oh, cool. Yeah, it sounds like that was it. Thank you. Thank y'all for taking me.
Thanks for letting me peek over your shoulder.
My